Welcome inside this edition of Big Ten Today, presented by Gatorade. Rick Pizzo, thrilled to be joined by Jake Butt. You look at the calendar, today is November 7th. In exactly 1 month, on December 7th, we'll be focused on Indianapolis in the 2024 Big Ten title game.
You know, coaches always say you treat every game the same, right? And that's true to an extent. But I could just tell you as a player, especially when Jim Harbaugh got to Michigan, things do change in November. Like, you know, it's championship season. The intensity's turned up, the pressure is turned up. And for a lot of these teams in the Big Ten Conference, like, think about where we're at right now. A team like Indiana, a chance to make that championship run. This is where the season really gets exciting.
Mention Michigan, mention Indiana, the perfect lead-in to our big story. It is a look at the Week 11 big board. Kicks off on Friday night on the coast, Iowa, UCLA. Now, it's not an extra large board this week because you have a half dozen teams on bye. Ohio State back inside the shoe against the Boilermakers. Minnesota has won 4 in a row. They'll travel to the Banks to take on Rutgers. The night games, Maryland at Oregon, right here on the Big Ten Network. Penn State's whiteout against Washington. And look top right, Michigan, defending national champs, now relegated in some fashions to the role of spoiler. And they'll try to spoil Indiana's storybook season coming up this weekend. We'll get Michigan's perspective in just a bit. But first, for Indiana, number 8 in the initial CFP rankings release. They're behind a couple of one-loss teams, including Penn State. If you're Curt Cignetti, are you selling the disrespect story this week?
Yeah, I think you absolutely are. And that's a great thing. It's a great thing. We've talked a number of times. Football is great to play with a chip on your shoulder. I know as a player, I grew up in Columbus, Ohio. Ohio State didn't offer me. I would tell our strength coaches, remind me in our hard lifts that they didn't want me. I liked that chip on my shoulder. Tom Brady, we know him as the greatest quarterback of all time. He identifies as a 6th-round pick, right? So it's good to play with the chip on your shoulder. And for all the positive momentum for Indiana and the fact that they're heavy favorites in this game, as a head coach, you're playing the psychological battle. You want to find a way to get your team inspired.
We have talked quite a bit about Curtis Rourke. There's no question if he has a big November, he could be in New York as part of the Heisman finalist ceremony. The run game has been good as well. What do those two things have in common? Good quarterback play, good run game. You have to have a good offensive line. And, Jake, I think that's one of the most overlooked aspects, not just of Indiana, maybe in college football this season. Do you know more than 1-2 names of an Indiana offensive lineman? Probably very few people outside Curt Cignetti can answer yes to that question, and yet that unit has been remarkably good. They'll have a big-time challenge this weekend against that Wolverine defensive line.
That's the key. And really, the difference between like the middle-of-the-pack teams and the championship teams is trench play and specifically offensive line. Look at last year's national title, Michigan and Washington. Washington wins the Joe Moore Award. Michigan was in the running. Georgia the 2 years prior. Those are great offensive lines. So the trench play is going to decide this. And really, it's a great test for Indiana. This is the best defense they've faced all year, but certainly the best defensive line they've faced all year. Guys like Mason Graham, Kenneth Grant, Josiah Stewart, they can take over games. What's been so impressive for India, one of their biggest strengths is their ability to stay on schedule. Stats tell the truth. They have the fewest amount of sacks allowed up front and the second fewest TFLs allowed. So they do not go backwards. That's all a credit to the big fellas up front, and it'll have to continue this week because that defensive line for Michigan can take games over.
I know Michigan's D-line is really good. So is Nebraska.
Yes.
And that Indiana offense just crushed the Nebraska defensive line, a D-line that had done a great job against other offenses earlier in the year. I do want to take it to the other offense and Michigan. Yes, the Wolverines lost against Oregon. I thought they played one of their better games of the year, and I think that they have finally found maybe the mix between Davis Warren and Alex Orji that at least keeps opposing defenses on their heels.
Oh, absolutely. And I agree that was likely their best game they played all year. And what Davis Warren has done is just provide stability at the quarterback position. His numbers haven't been eye-popping, but he's not turning the ball over, and he hasn't been sacked in their last 2 games, too. Those were 2 things that have plagued Michigan to start the year. So for them, it's not about having explosive offensive numbers. It was about removing those self-inflicted wounds. And I think now the challenge for offensive play caller Kirk Campbell is they've had to rely on gimmicky plays. You know, that Samaj Morgan to Alex Orji on fourth down.
The Donovan Edwards the week prior with the halfback pass.
Yes. So now I think the question for Campbell is, hey, Davis Warren can actually give us something. I mean, he made some nice plays off schedule down in the red zone. I think the offensive line has improved. So the question for him is when they get into those scoring situations, does he go back to the gimmick or the trick play, or does he trust his offense and feel they're capable of getting the job done?
I know Indiana has 3 games left. They have Michigan, then they have Ohio State on the road. They have Purdue to finish off the year. To me, if you beat Michigan, you're in the college football playoff because you're going to beat Purdue at the end of the year. No offense to Ryan Walters and company. Right now, Indiana is strictly a better team. I think as long as you show up in Columbus, if you're 11-1 and you're not part of the Big Ten championship game the first weekend in December, you're headed to the college football playoff.
It's almost prophetic in a sense because Kurt Cignetti in December, he's sitting in that basketball arena, and what does he say? He said, Purdue stinks. Okay, obviously, it's a rivalry. And he says, you know what? Michigan and Ohio State stink too. So there's your final 3 games. You got Michigan, you got a bye, you got Ohio State, and then you got Purdue. So it comes all the way full circle. All right, Coach, we don't need to Google you now. You got the whole world on notice. Now's the time to put it on tape.
I appreciate you paraphrasing and making this a G-rated show for all the young viewers out there. Cignetti may have used a slight bit more color in his language. Either way, he has backed up all the boasting. It'll be Indiana and Michigan in Bloomington, mid-afternoon kick on Saturday. At night.